I'm going to dive into some more tips about composition. So here's a little more of my own story. Age 13, I was really a serious photographer, and I'd already gotten pretty good. So the next stop, I mean, obviously there's a lot of stuff in between, but the next stop, and I'm kind of covering ground, my own learning process as far as composition goes. So this camera was given to me by my uncle, Sambo. That's what we called him, Uncle Sambo. Uncle Sambo was a really colorful guy. He was a naval aviator. World War II, he was a Top Gun pilot. Have you guys seen Top Gun? Top Gun 1 and Top Gun Maverick? Well, he was World War II version of that. Pretty amazing. But he was also an avid photographer. And he had this Rolleiflex that one day he sent to me. This box arrived and I opened it and there's this Rolleiflex. Wow, that was so cool. I got lots of rolls of film and I went from shooting 35 millimeter, it's about like this, to shooting 2 1/4 square, which is about like that. It's a medium format, much bigger real estate in terms of a negative. And what's also cool about that camera is you look in, it's a twin lens. So you look through the top down, and this top lens is what you see through, and the bottom lens is what you use to actually photograph. Very cool camera. And so I kind of look like this. This is what I look like about that age. I talked my principal into letting me go to Mexico in my senior semester, the last semester of my senior year in high school. I didn't go to high school. I went to Mexico. Kind of amazing, right? It's in my book, Create. You can read all about it. And I went to an area above Mazatlan as part of a project to build a medical dispensary. There were only like 6 of us. There's the teacher, and we started off with 4 high school kids, and it got whittled down to 2 of us. 2 of them only stayed a few weeks, and one of them only stayed a week, and he bailed out. And then somebody else stayed another couple of weeks, and then a good friend of mine actually stayed the other couple of weeks. And then it was like 3 of us from the United States, and then we were working with the locals here. So this was a lesson in composition. This is framing. Framing is like using your chef's knife. You're going to use it all the time, and there's many variations of framing. Many, many, many different variations of framing. But I love framing. It's an incredible tool. I had Fausto here lean out the window. We built everything you see here. We built. This was all handcrafted by yours truly and the little team there. We made the adobe, we hewed the wood, we put it all together. So Fausto's in this perfect frame. Doorways, windows, trees, edges of buildings make excellent frames. And what do? They focus on the subject, they add depth, they add layers, they add all kinds of really cool things with such a simple technique. Never forget how you can frame something and all the various variations. You could have a round frame, that's called oval, right? You could have, rectangular. There's many different ways you can frame, but it all comes under the heading of framing. It's a subject I learned from my Uncle Sambo when I was about 12. He taught me framing, and I used it ever since. This is another composition technique. This is in that little village in Mexico, Ahoya, Mexico. Color itself is a composition tool, because if color becomes the dominant item in your photograph, it is a composition tool. And this is a church door in Ahoya, Mexico. Where does your eye go? Your eye goes right to that door. And it's in a frame also. So the thing about composition is you can have multiple composition tools working together. It's very seldom that you have one all by itself. So in this case, we have the frame of the door. It is framed. And we have the blue of the door, which is another composition tool. I didn't know these things. I just thought that looks cool. And there it was. This is a little later. I was a mountaineering instructor in Colorado. Actually, got my mountaineering training in Wyoming at National Outdoor Leadership School. And that's where I learned about Yvon Chouinard making the rock climbing pitons. These are things back then we don't use them anymore, but you would pound them into the rock. And you see me with my Leica M2 around my neck, which I carried with me constantly. That's our dog, Camamere. Cam had his own backpack. What an awesome dog he was. What a cool dog. Anyway, that's what I looked like back then. Right about when I was going to enter the San Francisco Art Institute. And in the San Francisco Art Institute was Annie Leibovitz. You probably have heard of her. If you haven't, you should look her up. This is years and years later, meeting up with her at an exhibit in San Francisco. And she said, you can have what you think is the best equipment, and it doesn't help if you can't see. This kind of underscores what we were talking about. You got to learn to see. And that's the most powerful part of a photograph. Again, looking around and seeing. Annie Leibovitz, my son actually was working at a business where she came and did a shoot. And he said the first 15, 20 minutes, she didn't have a camera with her at all, just like what I was saying before. She was ABC, always curious. Always be curious, ABC. What are the good places for a shot? What do the scenes look like here? What does the lighting look like? Look at the lighting. Hold your hand out like this. Where is it coming from? Right? Where are the shadows? Where are the highlights? These are things you're curious about without a camera. So very important. Now, this is something I learned around this same time period from a great photographer, Edward Weston. I have videos on this channel. You should look them up. And he said, to compose a subject well means no more than to see and present it in the strongest manner possible. To compose a subject well means no more than to see and present it in the strongest manner possible. Here we are back at seeing. Strongest manner possible. What does that mean? In the Oxford Dictionary, it's defined as powerfully affecting the mind, senses, or emotion. His imagery made a strong impression. How do you get a strong impression across to someone else? Because what are we doing as photographers? We're communicating. We have a vision and we're communicating it to someone else. That's our game as photographers. So you look at it and you go, how can I make this as strong as possible? What can you do? Sometimes it's changing your angle. Like if you photograph someone from a low angle, you're going to make them look bigger in the frame. That's how angles work. If I want this person to look really big and dominant, I'm going to get really low. You heard my critique last week. We were talking about this. You can see a great example of Annie Leibovitz with Arnold Schwarzenegger, where she got really low, where he's on his skis looking up. Well, that's a strong way to present him, isn't it? There's an infinite variety of ways that you can present your subject in a strong way. Like, for instance, you're going to go out and photograph the mountains. Maybe a blue sky isn't the strongest way to show it, but you have these big, dark clouds, like my photograph in the Tetons. Dark clouds present that in a strong way. Let's see if I can give you some examples here. Well, we're jumping into a different tool. This is using we don't say rule of thirds around here, guidelines of the rule of, it's weird, it's kind of embedded in my brain. the guidelines that you can use as a way to compose. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But in this case, it works beautifully. And that's a strong way of composing in this case. It just so happens that these lines of thirds did line up. And David Smith is a really great outdoor wildlife photographer. I did an interview with him and he said, if you use them correctly, you get this points of thirds really line up and your eye goes to them. And he's absolutely right. He also made the point of if you're photographing an animal or a person and they're looking off in this direction, give them space in front of them. Don't have the scene cropped here because you're going to get kind of a claustrophobic cut off feeling. So give them space in front of them here, which is what he did. And that's using your lines of thirds, your points of thirds, and it can work. And it often does work, but not always. Don't get stuck in that. Like every photograph I take has to follow the quote rule of thirds. As Bob Holmes said, you're going to get boring looking photographs. It's like cooking. Do you want to cook everything the same way over and over? I always use chili pepper no matter what I'm cooking, It's like, an angel food cake with chili pepper on it isn't going to be the greatest thing in the world. This is one of my favorite photographers, Arnold Newman. And I love the way he captured Igor Stravinsky at his piano. It's very interesting because there's a series of frames you can see. He captured them all sorts of different ways in the center of the frame and whatnot. And he settled on this one. And look at this in terms of negative space. There's the subject. He's in the very bottom left-hand corner. This certainly has nothing to do with the rule of thirds or rule of anything. And look at how dominant the top of the piano is. And the white wall, everything is basically setting it up so your eye goes right to Igor there. Very brilliant photograph. They say that Arnold Newman, he didn't actually use the phrase environmental portrait, but he's been labeled with it. He's the guy who basically puts people in their environment to photograph them, which is my favorite way of doing portraiture. But this is another really important tool. Here's another compositional technique. It's called triangular composition. Triangles have been used in art. You can go back to Da Vinci. You can look at many different artists use a triangle because it's a very powerful way of composing. And you can see triangles in a lot of different ways. Obviously, Half Dome here in Yosemite is a perfect example of triangular composition. It's a really cool tool if you find it. One of the reasons you want to know these different composition techniques, and you should have my book. If you don't, you should order it, because there's 83 compositional guides, the ones I've been talking to you about, and a whole lot more. You should carry this around in your camera bag, folks. You can get the digital copy and have it on your phone if you want as well. Jared can put a link in there where you can actually buy it. You should buy this book if you don't already have it. This is going to open up your eyes to all sorts of ways of composing. And if you know what these tools are, you're going to start seeing them. There's a term for that, and I forget what it is, but when you learn something, let's say you're going to buy a certain car and you're buying a Land Rover, and all of a sudden you see nothing but Land Rovers. There's a term for that, and I'm forgetting what it is. If somebody knows what it is, put it in the chat. This is our friend Bob Holmes talking about gesture. I'll move myself so I'm not in the way of his amazing photograph. So notice how he lined up. This is brilliant here, how he lined up the feet to be right in between this one's legs. Perfect timing, and then the gesture of the hand. Really, really important. and a really cool way to photograph. So he had to be right on that and get the decisive moment, because that wasn't going to sit around, you know, a second later, those legs have moved and that photograph is no longer there anymore. Okay. I'm going to cover one or two more and then we're going to kind of recap here. So back the other way, Bob Holmes, again, our favorite photographer. This guy's amazing. Diagonal lines add a feeling of vitality here. You see these diagonal lines. Also notice their feet are up, which gives the feeling of motion. He won multiple awards for this. And this is, again, the decisive moment. He had to click the shutter right at the right moment. We have a video of him describing how the first woman came out. He got that shot. The second one, he got that shot. The third, and it was the fourth that brought this into the magical photograph. This is the magic that we're talking about. All right, I've given you guys a lot to work on. The key thing is always be curious. Go out in your environment and be curious. Where is that photograph? How can I get the strongest shot possible? How can I strengthen? Look at it. What if you move just a little bit over this way? What if you move a little bit over that way? What if you moved up a little bit? Maybe you got lower. What is it going to make this into a really strong photograph? And use the effort to get there. Action, motion on your part. Let's not be lazy as photographers and shoot everything at eye level. You know, maybe it's something you've got to get up really early in the morning to get that most powerful shot. Or you got to stay out late, you know, into the golden hour or the blue hour. You know, the thing about it is photography should be work. And one of the things that's happened in our digital age has become so flashy that we forget we have to work for it. Okay, I'm now preaching a little bit. But just be willing to get out there and work, okay? Has this helped you guys? I hope these tools help you. I want you guys to let me know in your comments here how you're using these. You can also go to AYP Club and comment there. I really want to hear back and forth with you. And ideally, if you go to AYP Club, you can actually post your photographs and talk about how you've used these different tools. That's really helpful. Okay, so that's what I wanted to cover for today. I want to remind you guys, please do subscribe. It helps me, it helps you, and enable the bell. And like this video, leave your comments, share it. You got to know some other photographers need to hear these things, okay? And last but definitely not least, I want you guys to say this with me. Remember to get out and capture your own images of life.